World War II saw the fastest evolution of fighter aircraft in human history. In just 6 years, the skies transformed, from biplanes to sleek, deadly machines that redefined air combat. These 5 aircraft didn't just fly, they helped shape the outcome of the war. Each one pushed the limits of speed, firepower and innovation. This is our look at the top 5 fighters of World War II. The Supermarine Spitfire was a 1930s designed British fighter aircraft, used predominantly by the RAF during World War II. It was developed into dozens of versions and variants and served well beyond the end of the war, with air forces throughout the world. It was produced in greater numbers than any other British aircraft and saw action from the deserts of North Africa to the frozen wastes of the Russian front. The Spitfire, though, is more than a mere aircraft. It's an icon and a legend.
This aircraft was flown in combat missions against the Luftwaffe, and they found towards the midpoint of 1942 the Mark V just wasn't fast enough to catch up with the German fighters of the time. So they moved more towards Mark IXs, and the Mark Vs they put into sort of home duties, sort of gunnery practice, etc.
The Merlin, like the Spitfire itself, was capable of extended development, and throughout the life of the Spitfire, the Merlin extended its power, ending up with virtually double the power, and then leading to the later generation, the Rolls-Royce Griffon engines.
No, it's a cracking aeroplane. You sort of forget how good it is and how vastly different it is to the Merlin engine. What a huge leap forward it was. For what it lacks in having to really fly the aeroplane, it makes up for in performance. I mean, the rate of climb is just staggering. It's probably an extra 2,000 feet a minute over a Merlin-powered aeroplane. So it's a very clever machine. The speed, the acceleration it's got from cruise up to 260 knots is remarkable. I mean, I don't really know if they ever really measured acceleration during the war, but if they measured it, I can assure you that this would have won, because it is staggering. And I think that's the real thing that would have come as a tremendous shock to them, is that all of a sudden this thing that they were able to chase last week is now climbing at 2,000 foot a minute faster than it was, and how on earth has it done that? Because to the untrained eye it doesn't look vastly different. Of course, if they could have heard it, they would have known. But yeah, it's remarkable that such a versatile aeroplane, the Spitfire, that it can work brilliantly with 900 horsepower and yet still cope with 2,000 horsepower.
The Messerschmitt Me-109, the fighter aircraft that came to define the Luftwaffe in the eyes of those who opposed it in the air and terrified those who watched it from the ground. A 1930s interceptor design originally penned by Willy Messerschmitt and Robert Lusser. It was built en masse, over 30,000 examples, both by Messerschmitt's own factory and subcontractors, from the 1930s through until, incredibly, the 1950s. It served as a fighter bomber, an escort and a variety of other roles, modified, rearmed and even re-engined to serve longer and against more opponents than its designers could have ever imagined.
When you talk about the Luftwaffe during the Second World War, the aviation aficionados and general public will recognise one name, the Messerschmitt, particularly the Messerschmitt 109, or a purist would say the Bf 109 from the Bayerische Flugzeugwerk, Bavarian aircraft factory.
The aeroplane always, like trying to give a bit of credit to the Bouchons, which everyone's desperate to take away, is that the 109 was always an aeroplane that has probably had more power plants on the front of it than any other warbird type I know of.
A friend of mine that's flown Paul Allen's Messerschmitt up in Seattle, he told me, he said, oh, you land it straight, make it up straight approach, land straight, it'll go straight. He said, but if it start going sideways and you let it do it, it's going to keep going sideways as long as you don't get on top of it. I know people who say they'd happily go to war in this. It's a wonderful little airplane. But on the other hand, I know guys who've gotten out of them and, crossed themselves and said never again once they got out of the airplane.
For most people's understanding, it's an Me-109. This was an amazing aircraft, designed, flown in the mid-1930s, used in anger over Spain in the Condor Legion during the Spanish Civil War, when Italian and German forces, fascist forces, fought against the Republicans and fought with Franco.
So I think the important thing to consider is that the Germans, and I know that's casting like a huge net, but they're phenomenal engineers, always have been, and I'm sure always will be. And the aeroplane, from a design standpoint, from the earliest variants, was designed by engineers for engineers. I think the piloting element of it came a bit later on. So elements like the narrow track undercarriage, it is my understanding that that was specifically designed in the way it is designed so that the aircraft could be moved by road and rail readily. And the undercarriage legs remain with the fuselage when you take the wings off. And the wings come off, so we've had a wing off and back on that aeroplane behind me there inside half an hour. It is designed to have the wings taken off and on quickly.
Move these millions of worthy machines. But I like it, and I especially like the 109 because it's a real pilot's challenge.
Light, fast and deadly at low altitude, the Yakovlev Yak-3 was the Soviet Union's finest fighter of World War II. Introduced in 1944, it was smaller and more refined than its predecessors, built for speed, agility and close quarters, dogfighting on the Eastern Front. With excellent climb rate, superb handling and a tight turning radius, the Yak-3 outperformed even the Bf 109 and FW 190 in low altitude combat, where most Soviet-German air battles were fought. Pilots loved it for its responsiveness. Enemies feared it for its precision. Though not as well known in the West, the Yak-3 proved itself again and again in the hands of Soviet and Free French pilots alike.
It was a very, very effective aeroplane. and it was made quickly and just a good airplane.
It's just such a rewarding airplane to fly. You just want to get back in it each time. Once I've flown it at the beginning of the season, maybe 5 or 6 times, I'm at home with it.
This is a Yak III, and I believe it was built in 1994, around thereabouts. It was built in the factory in Russia supposedly by some of the same people who had built them during the war. They're pretty airplanes, but they're not pretty construction. The way they build things, the way the Russians put stuff together is not always the prettiest. This one's got a lot of upgrades to it, like hydraulic brakes and things like that. Originally they had air brakes. The Russians used a lot of air systems on stuff because it wouldn't freeze up and sludge up and stuff like that. But I've never flown a Yak 3, but I've flown in the Yak 9 and I've flown in the Yak 11, and they got the same wing on them. And when you sit down in the fuselage and look sideways, the wings are so short you can barely even see it. It's a wonderful little airplane. I don't fly these airplanes. I'm just a mechanic, but I would love the chance to fly this. And nearly everybody that flies for the museum, the pilots we have, they all would really love to fly this. So I think one of these days when we have time, we'll get it back going. It wouldn't take much to do it, but time's something, just a luxury we don't always have.
They wanted an air superiority fighter, and so they took the Yak-1 and they shrunk it. So it's got the same power as the early Yak, but it's 10% smaller. So the Yak-9, which looks very similar to it, for instance, has got a 33-foot wingspan. This has only got 30 feet. And to put that into context, a Piper Cub has got 176 square feet of wing, and this has only got 160, and it weighs 2.8 tons. But what that means is it's very, very good at low level, up to 5,000 meters, and that's what it was. It was an interceptor. It would outturn a Messerschmitt 109 Gustav in 3 turns, and it would outturn a Focke-Wulf 90 in 2 turns. So if you got into a turning fight with a Yak 3, you'd lose. And they were shooting the Luftwaffe down by about the ratio 5 to 10 to 1. And in the end, Goering banned his pilots from engaging Yaks with chin mounts radiators because they were the Yak 3s. And they were just banned below 5,000 meters. There was no contact with the enemy anymore. So basically they destroyed the Luftwaffe from the east while we were doing it from the west.
Historians love to talk about the comparisons between the 109 and the Mustang, or the Hurricane, or the Spitfire, or the Yak. But through the development of that indigenous design from the Yakovlev Bureau, the Yak-1 to the Yak-9, they created a fighter that has to be considered amongst the top range of Allied fighters of World War II for the job it was doing on the Eastern Front.
It gets quite squirrely on the runway. That's the problem with them. They're compromised airplanes. They've got a small wing, and so you've got massive runway speeds. You get airborne at 95 knots, and you stay in ground effect to 125 knots before you move away from the ground. And for landing, you're at 105 knots over the hedge. So it's actually landing at speeds of light aircraft cruise at. And it takes a lot of getting used to. It's the hardest plane I've pretty much landed, and I've flown, getting on for 300 aircraft types now, and it's a handful. It was designed to land into wind on a grass field. It wasn't designed to land on concrete with a crosswind. And so anything that's remotely crosswind or concrete has got my complete attention. But apart from that, it's fantastic.
The iconic Hawker Hurricane paved the way for British single-seat fighter aircraft. Almost 15,000 Hurricanes took to the skies during the Second World War. However, its success, especially in the Battle of Britain, was overshadowed by the advent of the more glamorous Supermarine Spitfire. The Hurricane was a tough machine that was significantly cheaper to produce and took far fewer man-hours despite its incredibly complex but very tough airframe.
Hurricane is remembered really because it was the fighter of the Battle of Britain. It was a design concept in the 1930s, and it was the first 8 machine-gunned fighter in the RAF.
You cannot fly the aeroplane without thinking about what's gone on before you. Every time you're sitting in an aeroplane that's surrounded by fuel, it's a hot environment. The aeroplane is hot inside when you fly it because you sit actually over the radiator, so you've got an awful amount of warm air coming up. It's kind of 80 degrees in the cockpit, winter or summer.
And while the Hurricane was inferior to the 109, the Messerschmitt 109, in many areas, speed and height, it was very good at manoeuvrability and could outturn its German counterpart. And in the Battle of Britain, around 60% of the victories were down to Hurricanes because there were more Hurricanes in service than there were Spitfires.
It did a great deal, and the Battle of Britain is the first place people migrate to, and indeed the word overlooked is often used when describing the Hawker Hurricane.
Proper aficionados actually understand the Hurricane did all the work and carried on unchanged really right the way through right in Burma to the end of the war.
Places like Malta, the Mediterranean, North Africa, I mean the aeroplane served right throughout the theatres of the Second World War, and I think that makes it a standout aeroplane for people to understand.
The flaw in the design was the fuel tanks were in the wing roots, which led to what was called hurricane burn. So if the aircraft caught fire, the flames would actually be funneled up into the cockpit and you'd have fractions of a second to bail out. Otherwise, you'd be severely burnt or killed. That was certainly a design flaw at the time. One of the mainstays of the defence of Malta initially, before we could get Spitfires out there, and very used heavily in the North Africa campaign. So it was a lot easier to fly in the conditions in Africa in the sand. Went on to tank busting, things like that, had bigger cannons installed, and it was used as a light bomber, carrying a bomb underneath its belly as well. So it was multitask.
When you're around these aeroplanes, you know what was going on. I can look at books and I can hear the spanners falling, and I can hear the mechanics talking about what they're doing and what the inspector's saying as he signs various bits off. You kind of don't get away from it. It absorbs your life. It takes over your life. There's no question about it. It must have been fantastic to see mass-produced aeroplanes like this.
The North American P-51 Mustang entered the war late, but when it arrived, the skies over Europe changed forever. Designed in just 117 days, the Mustang began as a British request for an American-built fighter. But it was the addition of the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine that transformed it, from a capable airframe into one of the fastest, highest-flying and longest-range fighters of the war. With a top speed over 430 miles per hour and a range of nearly 1,600 miles with drop tanks, the P-51 could go the full distance from English airfields deep into the heart of Germany and back again. Armed with 6.50 caliber machine guns and unmatched high-altitude performance, it became the ultimate escort, turning the tide in the strategic bombing campaign by protecting B-17s and B-24s all the way to their targets. Ace pilots loved it. Bomber crews owed their lives to it. The Mustang wasn't just a fighter, it was a symbol of Allied air power.
It had started life basically as the P-51A with the Allison engine, but the P-51B and the P-51C then came along with the Merlin engine.
The Merlin just fits the Mustang like putting a sock on, really. It's just putting your hand in a glove. Everything just falls into place. It's a tight installation. The cowls are a good fit around it. It's streamlined. It was similar to the Allison engine in as much as V12, the same shape. The mounting principle is different, so it had to be a whole new engine mount designed to put on the front of the firewall to accommodate the long Merlin.
The Mustang was essential for the survival of the long-range bomber program.
Well, I often go back and refer it to a Harvard or T6. I often compare the Harvard T6 to like flying a Harley, that bum 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 bum, that real feel, seat in your pants kind of feel, and you feel like you have some hot, good iron around you. Well, when you fly the Mustang, you feel like you're flying a race car or a sport bike, and it's that zip-de-doo across the sky, and it's you definitely wear the aircraft and you fly like you stole it.
It takes only seconds to shoot down a fighter aircraft. And in combat, the P51B and the P51C had a problem in the design of the cockpit canopy, because on the earlier models, you had this structure. Okay, the structure, it needs to have the rigidity, it's metal, but you can see, sitting behind this, I've got things blocking my vision. That needed to be improved. They came up with an idea called the Malcolm hood, which was a sort of halfway phase, in a sense, between that and the P51D with the teardrop canopy.
D model Mustang. This is Sierra Sioux. It is probably, I think undoubtedly, the most accurate representation of an original Mustang flying in the world today. It was completed couple years ago, and this is the first Mustang I ever sat in. Belonged to a good friend of mine named Doc Christgau. Doc was a medical doctor here in Minneapolis and owned this airplane for many, many years, and it was an air show, I think, in the summer of 1987, and he let me sit in it. And I was sitting in it, he was sitting on the wing, and he looked at me and he said, "You'll fly one of these someday." And I said, "How's that going to happen?" And he said, "I don't know, but I can see it in your eyes." And when they finished up this restoration, I had the honor and privilege of doing the test flight on it, and that was really an exciting way to close a circle that was open for a long time. And Doc's gone now, and he was a great guy, and this airplane's a great tribute to him and all those who flew this airplane in protection of our freedom. Right, it has the original fuel tank in the back, and all the radios, all that stuff works. Again, the folks up at Air Corps Aviation in Bemidji just went to extraordinary lengths to bring this airplane back to its absolute original standard.
It's in a beautiful new hangar here as well.
Yes, the Wings of the North Museum, Paul Allen commissioned the restoration on this airplane, and he works with the Wings of the North Museum here in Flying Cloud Airport to keep this airplane on the display so the public can enjoy it as well. This thing's due for an annual at the end of the month.
From the skies over Britain to the vast expanse of the Eastern Front, these 5 fighters weren't just machines, they were turning points in history. Each brought something different to the war: speed, firepower, range, resilience, and above all, impact. This was our take on the top 5 fighters of World War II. But what about you? What aircraft would make your list, and which one takes your top spot? Let us know in the comments.